It's exciting to be here. It's always for me very exciting and meaningful to be part of the ride. And much as I love riding, I do appreciate that this ultimately is a fundraising event. So to have the opportunity to talk to you about um, tips and tools for fundraising is wonderful. But before I get into some strategy, let me turn the floor over to Miriam, who can give you a lot more insight and color to the organization that we're supporting.
Thank you so much, David and Ilana, and thank you all for being here. I think there's two words in Israel Ride. One is Israel and the other is Ride. The Ride, that's all on you. And Israel is today a little more tricky to get people who are knowledgeable or concerned about Israel's current progress to understand good news. And we at the Arava Institute are really happy to be that good news. We are happy to be an Israeli institute whose executive director in Israel is a Palestinian Israeli, Dr. Tarek Abu Hamed, who's been with us for many years and was the former acting and then Minister of Science for the State of Israel. He is has a PhD and 2 postdocs, including from the Weizmann Institute in renewable energy. He was our head of academic administration as well as renewable energy. And of course, it took us 2 people to replace him now that he has become our executive director. And part of our success for the past 26 years is that we walk the talk. We welcome and include Arabic speaking, we like to say, because it includes people from the region. Nowadays, they might be from Morocco. They very soon might be from Gulf states, etc. 1/3 Arabic speaking students, whether those are Israeli, Palestinians, Jordanians, other citizens of the region, Israeli Jews, and international students in a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, which has been our mantra since our forming, really in the wake of the Oslo Accords 26 years ago. But we have, through that time, both brought together students to learn about environmental peace building in the face of political conflict. There has never been a time when the region has been without that. And our students learn to understand themselves, each other, the situation, the science, in order to look for solutions that help solve the region's problems. Because our other, you're going to hear a lot of these things, but nature knows no borders. If there is if you dirty the water under the ground in one part of the region, trust me, the next part feels it. If waste is dumped out of Gaza, it closes desalination plants that Israel uses to get clean water. There's no border that nature can really erect that keeps the region, and these are smallish countries. I mean, Israel isn't that much bigger than New Jersey. So these are pretty tight borders, and having environmental cooperation across these borders is essential to success. And that has been only doubled by climate change. Climate change is making this region one of the hottest regions in the world. It is believed that much of it will be uninhabitable within 40 years. And that is causing and will cause climate refugee problems that will bring people across borders. One of the first climate civil wars was the Syrian civil war. And there are still millions of refugees in Jordan and in other places caused by that civil war. But as I said, we are part of the good news. We are part of the solution. Tarek is being tapped by the Israeli government, by regional parties, by the United Nations, by COP27, which is one of the big UN global meetings about environmental issues. He is being tapped as a speaker to bring people together, to bring Jordanians, Israelis, Palestinians to these things, and as part of the Israeli delegation to these conferences. The United Nations, which tends not to always look so favorably upon Israel, has welcomed one Israeli group to the environmental program lately, and that is us. There are two others, but interestingly, they're both Christian groups based in Israel. We're the only one that's an Israeli group based in Israel, located on a kibbutz in the south of Israel. So it is interesting that our representation by a Palestinian Israeli is very meaningful, not just to us, but to our friends and neighbors. I want to tell you a story about our students. Once upon a time, that's the way all good stories start, right? Once upon a time, three of our students, a Palestinian who grew up in Jordan, an Israeli from the north, and a Dutch woman were invited to the home of the Israeli for, a long weekend or such. And the Palestinian student said, well, I've never been to the home of an Israeli. And the Israeli said, don't worry, my parents have never had a Palestinian visit them either. And I think the Dutch woman is just kind of like, and you know what? We think of our international students like they're very like, they're kind of calm in this storm. They're kind of watching it go by. But the Palestinian says to the Israeli, I think my grandparents are from near where your parents live. I'm going to get some information from them. And these kids are not stupid. We educate them for a reason. They use their historical GPS surveys and figure out where that village was. And there really isn't much left. It's a few houses, like rubble, and a couple of trees, kind of behind a gas station. And he says, my grandparents still have the key to their house. And she says, my grandparents still have the key to their apartment in Vienna. But the most interesting thing about this story is that he told it. We have something called the Dialogue Project, where we bring Palestinians or Arabic speakers and Israeli Jews to the United States to tour, whether they go to synagogues, universities as part of recruitment, etc. And he told this story as part of his expression of what he learned as being part of the Arava Institute. One thing that all our students engage in is what we call the Peace Building and Leadership Seminar. Every week for about an hour and a half, and it's on Friday. So really, you got to want to be there, or actually we require them to be there. Our students talk, and what we say is they talk about what they don't want to talk about. They talk about conflict, they talk about gender, they talk about democracy, they talk about equality, they talk about what for them are the hard issues, and for all of us would be the hard issues also. And they learn to hear each other, respect each other, cry with each other, fight with each other, and then they go off to the pub and they do their laundry and they sit and study together and they whatever. And I think the most important thing is the intensity of the relationships they build, the opportunity to get to know each other in this way, living in the same dorms, eating in the same caf, et cetera, and so forth, really builds relationships that last a lifetime and allow them to surmount their differences and the things that separate people. We also, along with having a student body, that's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, we also have research. Some of our research areas are renewable energy, where one of our new programs is in Agri-photovoltaics. I like talking about this one because I understand it. Agri-photovoltaics is, just as it sounds, solar, but it's above a field, and then they grow things underneath it. Now, it's not like low, it's high enough that you get a tractor underneath it. Important, I asked that question right away. And what does it do? Well, first of all, those photovoltaics, those solar cells, feed the system. They give you power. Secondly, they shade the plants because it's getting too sunny and too hot for the plants. Thirdly, that shade allows the moisture with that is that the watering systems provide to be evaporated more slowly. And what they're finding is the plants grow a little bigger as a result, not a little smaller. And this is in test. This is something we are doing along with the Jewish National Fund's Kasser Joint Institute. And we are the test site in Israel for this. And we are beginning to get requests from Jordan, from the Jordan Valley, to try this out in other places. So this is like new technology. We're also working on water. It will come as a surprise to you, as it did to me, that 30% of the world's population still lives without sewage systems. And we have developed a solar sewage system that allows water to be reused for agriculture. Israel is a brilliant reuser of water, something like 84%, while most of the world is, Spain, I think, is next in the 20s, and then the rest of the world kind of goes like this. And this is an off-grid technology that has, by the way, 30% of the world is off-grid, but they mostly have cell phones. It can operate off your cell phone, and it is a technology that we've actually patented along with engineers who developed it. And we are looking forward to scaling and spreading this model. So there's sort of the student part. There's the research part in which students and interns engage as well, and our faculty. And then finally, there's our Climate Change Research Center and environmental diplomacy work. Clearly, Tarek engages in this. Many of our other faculty, we have many projects like the ones I just mentioned, where we're bringing the technology out of Israel, which is, they call it Spaceship Israel. Israel could survive on desalinated water and photovoltaic cells and all these things, but its neighbors are not all in the same place. So that's something that Israel and the Arava Institute are sharing, including in the West Bank, in Jordan, even in the Gaza Strip, where we were able to, with the approval of the Israeli Defense Forces and the Israeli Civil Authority, bring clean water systems, the small-scale desal units into Gaza for the use of medical centers and community centers. So we're really doing a lot of the good work. I could tell you lots of stories like the one I told you about the kids. I think, they are our best product. Now we have something like 1,800 alumni around the world. There just was a get together in Israel of the alumni. We try to move it around the region so that people can have an opportunity to get together. And there are 170 showed up and from as far away. People came from China, people came from the US, mostly the people came from the region to do everything like share music and share their attitudes, et cetera, and so forth. One thing one of you mentioned is that people are going to support you, and that is primary. Of course, the people who hear from you know you're going out to do this good work, et cetera. But we also want them to support the Arava, and we want you to feel comfortable and confident in the messages you give them about why you're doing this in support of the Arava Institute. Like, you're not doing this just, well, maybe you are. I shouldn't say I know why you're doing this, but you're doing this to take an interesting ride in Israel, see some amazing things, to get some great messaging. We're going to make sure we ecotourism you a little bit. That is, this is not the last message you'll hear about the Arava Institute. Let me put it to you that way. But you also have the opportunity for you to carry this message, that you're doing this because you align with the values of peace and environmental cooperation. I would say that there's lots of opportunity. If you need a story, feel free to ask me, whether that's students touring Yad Vashem, for those of you who've been to Israel before and have been to the Holocaust Memorial there together and learning those values together, or people, there was a recent article by a person who had been at the Institute. She wasn't actually an alum, she was the partner of an alum, but she had lived at the Institute, about learning to celebrate Israel independence and commemorate the Nakba, what the Palestinians called the catastrophe, at the same place at the same time on a kibbutz in Israel. And how, like, your brain wants to break a little bit hearing that. But in fact, it's sort of a rare place where those two things can happen and you can walk away with a really positive message. And that's, I think, the number one thing. This is positive Israel. This is positive peace. This is positive the environment. This is working on climate change. This is making a difference on the ground. And I like to say I work for my children's nonprofit. I work for something that my kids can believe in, that they can talk about, that they can. It's funny, someone reached out to me about a job, and my daughter's like, you would never leave for them. Like, Harvard. Yeah. Like that she was. So it was sort of funny, but it's that it is the work that we want to be doing and that we want to be able to tell people we're doing. So I welcome your support. I very much appreciate your coming on the Israel ride and raising funds for us. And we're happy to help keep feeding you stories and information. And if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them now, later, whenever you'd like. And I can post my email.
That's wonderful.
Thank you, Miriam.
Thank you very much, Miriam. So our goal tonight is, as I say it, to help you find your Israel Ride fundraising voice. We totally appreciate that people have a lot of reasons, all wonderful from my perspective, for doing the Israel Ride. The specific reason we're focused on is one of our reasons for why we execute it, which is to raise money to support the work of the Arava Institute. I try to set a high bar. Last year, we had at least a dozen riders who raised over $10,000 for the ride. My hope is that even though by design this year's ride is a bit smaller, we'll well exceed that dozen riders. Hopefully the stories that Miriam has shared with you can, speak to each of you in one way or another, and hopefully at least one leaves you with something that you can share with your potential donors and supporters as to, this is why I'm doing this ride. What I'd like to do is take a few minutes to share some of the lessons that we've learned, not just from my experience, but mostly actually from the experience of other people who've been successful fundraisers on the ride over the years. I share these not to tell you this is what you should do, but to help you navigate your own path. And I think that's important. There's definitely some things that we'd encourage you to keep in mind, but you have to find the approach that works best for you to execute on them, because that's what makes you the most natural and the most effective. One thing as a starter, especially for people who haven't done this before, the fundraising can seem kind of daunting. And I totally appreciate that. It's a long time since I did my first fundraising bike ride, but it made me nervous then. And even though I've been fortunate to be pretty successful at it over the years, it still makes me a little bit nervous at some point each year. But experience tells us it's actually totally doable. And I reverse it a little bit. Think of what you're doing in addition to the fundraising. You're going to Israel, you're riding a couple 100 miles on a bicycle, and you're doing all of that to raise money for this cause. When you're reaching out to a friend or an associate to raise money for this, a little part of the message is that you're asking them for a donation and to support it. But actually a big part, in the eyes of a lot of the people that support you, you're kind of a rock star. They would never think of doing something like that. It's intimidating. So if you find the fundraising a little bit intimidating, think of how completely intimidating the undertaking you're taking on might be for some other people, and work with that. So a few lessons learned. First off, and I've already alluded to this, but think through what works for you. And what I mean by that, we're going to talk a little bit about, communications and repetition and being persistent and all these other things. But the start is, how do I connect with my friends? Am I primarily an email person? Am I a texting person? Am I a phone person? Do I love to get together with people for coffee? You should build your fundraising outreach around what's most natural for you. And probably the only exception I'd suggest for that is, even if you are definitely a meet in person for coffee person, but you have a friend who's definitely a just text me if there's something you want to tell me some person, text that friend, because you want to meet them also where they are. But think about what works for you, what works for your friends, and start from that perspective. I think when I look at our riders, most use one or another of the tools that are out there, either through us, or they do their own work on social media, or they use emails and mail merge and things like that. But it's get comfortable with what works for you and then plan your campaign around that. Really important, make it personal. And it's, if the price you end up having to pay is, well, I wasn't quite sure how to personalize it in a bulk way, so I did less outreach, the return on the outreach is enough higher that I would say choose that. Although what I'd really suggest is, let us tell you how to use some of the tools so that you can do personalized outreach to a whole group of people. But as you think about making it personal, that literally means getting your hands around why this is important to you, and then sharing that with your potential donors. I know for me personally, as examples, I have very deep connection to Israel. I felt that, from the tips of my toes to every part of my body ever since the first visit I made to Israel in 1979, I think it was. And while I've come to appreciate the complexity of Israel and the challenges of Israel, it doesn't mean that deep connection is any less with each passing year. So that's a little bit independent of the ride, but where does it come back to the ride is, I see what the ride is doing. I see the impact it has on students at the Institute, alumni of the Institute, and I should say on other riders. And that says to me that participating in this ride is the best way to support my relationship with Israel, because it actually is building the foundation, the long-term foundation for people having bridges to peace. And I love the whole environmental connection. I think that's hugely important, but actually it's the person-to-person connection that works for me. And I should note, another thing that works for me is the impact on riders. It's been a privilege for me to be able to do the ride for many years. But one very exciting part of that privilege actually is seeing the impact that the ride has on other riders, whether they've done it once and will probably never do it again, or they've had the opportunity to do it several times. The other thing to keep in mind in your personal communications with people is use those as an opportunity to talk about and reinforce your commitment. So it's not just, dear Miriam, I'm doing this ride. I'm really excited about it. I know I wrote to you 2 weeks ago, but now I'm sending you another reminder. Please make a gift. Um, at some level, that's maybe the bottom line on the email, but actually what's happened over that 2 weeks, I've made real progress in my training for the ride. I've made progress in my fundraising for the ride. I've seen something that furthers my excitement about the ride. Share all of that, because ultimately people are contributing to you. It's your personal story that will matter. Another set of lessons, I call these the 3 Ps that I've gotten from various riders over the years. Be persistent, be personal, but be polite. What do we mean by persistent? It simply said is not sufficient to send out one email fundraising letter and call it a day. And it's not that that letter falls on deaf ears. It's that most of your friends are in the same boat as you are, which is they get so much incoming each day that if they don't remember to deal with it that day, it might be forgotten. So the repetition, your first email that says this is what you're doing and this is why, and that you're very excited about it, and you hope they'll support you. But following up a couple weeks later, it can't be the exact same email over again, but it can be the update. This is, you're very excited, and so far, X number of people have already supported the ride, and you're X% through your fundraising goal. And in the meantime, you've been out on a bicycle 4 times to train for the ride. But something that gets it back out there, reinforces your commitment, and also builds on the momentum you already have and encourages people to donate. I can honestly say that after 18 years now of doing the Israel ride, 20 years of doing other fundraising rides, I have actually never sent out a batch of emails and not received back at least one additional contribution. So even when you think, my gosh, at this point, everybody who's planning on contributing must have contributed, there's somebody who's waiting for that one more ask. And then it's really important, and I say personal, also polite. These are your friends. They're adults. They don't need you to decide for them that they should contribute. They'll decide on their own, but you shouldn't corner them. You do still want them to be your friends. So you're being persistent, but it's not the, why haven't you contributed yet? Or, gosh, I supported your ride last year. I thought you would do my ride this year. If there's something else going on in the background, they can figure that out on their own. But you want to be in the position of not ever leaving people feeling awkward or cornered. I think that's the flip side of the persistence, is that it's gentle persistence. And you think about fundraising models we've heard of out there. I think in our parents' generation, sometimes somebody might, get everybody into the same room and basically say, we're not leaving this room until we've raised X. I suspect Miriam would confirm that that's not a strategy the Arava Institute uses today, nor would pretty much any other organization. They want people to feel really good and excited about supporting it. And the third P, make it personal. And personal is, in some cases, is pretty simple. It's that literally, instead of sending an email that's dear friend, it's dear David or dear Bruce or dear Alana. But it actually, at a bare minimum, has the name of the person it's going to. We know from experience that when you take the time to do that, and the software will do it for you, you will get a higher response rate and more generous donations. And think about, reverse those shoes a little bit, and you're in the position. I actually have a situation that occurs with me once a year from a friend of mine. I get a fundraising letter for actually a ride that I always support. It's also a ride I do, but the fundraising letters always addressed dear friend, and it's sent out by the person's admin. I've actually never contributed to that person's ride. Contribute to dozens of other people who do that ride, because they're not even putting themselves in it to ask for the donation. It's not from them, and it's not to me. So really what they're doing is they like doing this bike ride, it raises money, they let their staff at work do the fundraising for them. I think you owe it to your donors to be a little bit more personal than that. Next, and I think this is hugely important, be inclusive. We all have a sense of what our friends care about and what they support and what they might not support. But if you choose not to send them a fundraising letter, you're deciding for them that this isn't a cause they feel strongly about, or that they don't want to support you in supporting this cause. And in fact, that's somewhat presumptuous. I think of a panelist, we did a similar panel to this last year. One of the panelists said he even includes his dry cleaners and the plumbers and other people who work on his house. He does business with them. He doesn't really ask them to do business with him, but he'd like for them to support this, and they do. For me, a story that I feel like I learned a huge amount from many years ago. It's when I first started doing the Israel ride. I was already committed to a different ride, another charity ride that I do feel very strongly about. I'd already been doing it for a couple of years, and I was worried that my fundraising for the Israel ride would take away from my fundraising for that. So I filtered my list, and basically everybody who contributed to the other ride, I did not send a note to ask them to contribute to the Israel ride. No sooner than I've sent the letter, I'm at a swim meet with one of my kids. Somebody walks by and says, I saw that you're doing the bike ride in Israel. If you don't see a donation from me, send me a reminder. Really nice comment. Except that the person sitting next to me was someone who always contributes to the other ride I mentioned. So they had not gotten the letter. First person walks away, and the person sitting next to me turns to me and says, you're doing a bike ride in Israel? I say, yes. And it's a fundraising ride? And I say, yes. And you didn't ask us to support it. And as I'm trying to explain that I thought that was the polite thing to do, she literally says, I am insulted. Huge comment there. And hopefully I took from that a real lesson. Our friends are adults. They can say no. But in this case, the real ask was give us the opportunity to say no or to say yes. And in fact, that couple has remained one of the most generous donors for me to both rides. But had I not chosen to include them and we not bumped into each other at the swim meet, wouldn't have even happened. So err on the side of being inclusive. That me learning that lesson has meant that over the years, I still have the same commitment to both rides. I still do both of them each year. And I still raise at least $10,000 a year for each of them. And all of the people who support the first one, they actually know that 2 weeks after it's over and they've gotten my last thank you note, they're going to get the request to support the second one. But probably 70–75% of my donors overlap both. So err on the side of being inclusive. I think it's further what my friend had really said there. We shouldn't presume that we know for somebody else. If you're being polite and you're being inclusive, they can say, gosh, David, I think it's great that you're doing that, but it's not for me. And that's fine. But let them know it. And then I think super important, and to me, probably the last specific lesson I'll leave you with, for asking, we basically said, ask early, ask often, have a campaign, and with that to schedule. But you should take the same discipline about showing appreciation. Every single person who supports your ride at whatever level they supported at is making a sacrifice to support your endeavor here. And that means you should really look to show your appreciation. It should be sincere. I hope it's sincere, and also to include them. So that means, the price of entry. As soon as you get notice of the donation, send the thank you note, and then keep in touch with them. They don't need to get your regular campaign of more solicitations because they've already donated. In fact, that can confuse them. But it doesn't mean they might not appreciate getting a periodic update that says, along with your support, I've now received 75% of my goal, or I've now met my goal, and this is what I've still been doing for training. That shows that you actually weren't just asking them for the transaction, but they're part of your experience now. And then importantly, do include them in the ride, whether I always try the day before we leave Jerusalem to send out a note that basically says, tomorrow I ride, and includes a photo of my gear that's all ready to go, even if I might not be. One or two updates during the ride. And, it's pretty spectacular that you finish, but let them feel like they were with you throughout the ride, and send them a thank you when you finish. How do you let them feel like they're with you? Everyone has their own style. I think the regular communications make a really nice thing. I see in the chat, send them that nice sweaty picture of you on the beach. Yes, do that. Other people do other things. I, because of my strong feelings for Israel, for years I've carried an Israeli flag with me on the ride. I remember learning from another rider, they carried something in their bag with the names of each of their donors. And that's so that they can literally say to your donors, you're with me. I loved that idea, but I put the names on the Israeli flag instead of in my pack, but it's conveying the same thing. We have other riders, myself included, that after the ride, that some send a photo from the ride. That's pretty easy to do these days. I'm active with Jewish National Fund, so a commitment I make to each of my riders is we'll plant a tree in honor of each of the riders, each of the donors. And sending the tree certificate, I think it's the only thank you note I've ever sent to people, because essentially that's what it is. But I get thank you notes back because people really appreciate that there's a tree planted in their honor in Israel for their support of the Israel ride. Whatever you're doing here, the key is to show appreciation, sincere appreciation, and do it in a way that hopefully leaves your donors feeling like they're part of your experience. We have a lot of tools that will help with this. We're not going to dwell on those today because could be a whole topic for a separate session. And it's also something that if any of you would like some time with Alana to walk through some of the specific tools, she's happy to do that separately. We'll also send out a link to the video that we did last year on how to use some of the tools so that you'll have that available, but we're happy to help you with any of them. And I think with that, I'd love to open it up to questions. And I'm double checking the chat to see if.
Yeah.
Oh, David Green, thank you for this quote from Wayne Gretzky. I love it. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And I'd share one year, still taking this lesson from a long time ago. One year I'd met somebody at a conference I was speaking at. They were another speaker, and we had some distant connections. We'd gone to the same college, but in different years, and that was the sum total of it. But there was no professional conflict. So when it wasn't the Israel ride then, but when my other ride came up, I included them in the solicitation letter, and they sent a hugely generous donation. Every donation was generous, but this was like outsized generous. And the note was, this is something I always wanted to support, and you gave me a way to support it. And very touching to me. Also took a big chunk off my fundraising obligation. And if I was pre-filtering people, not taking the shot, I wouldn't have received the donation. Other questions?
Don't be shy.
Don't be shy. Sharon,
Oh,
I don't want to put Sharon on the spot, but Sharon's also been involved with the ride for quite some time and is part of our weekly sort of steering / marketing / PR committee. Any other suggestions you'd like to add, Sharon?
I don't know if I have any suggestions I would like to add, but I mean, I like to, I use emails. I personalize everyone. It takes me, I'm not email savvy. It takes me a long time to do it. I use Facebook. One tip that someone taught me, I think on my first ride back in 14, was they had business cards made up with their URL link to the ride. So if they were just casually talking to people, said, "Oh, that might be interesting," they could hand them something. And you can get those made up, pretty cheap these days. And I thought that was a brilliant idea that I think is great. And and being persistent and doing it over and over again. Sometimes just send an email without even the link saying, "This is what I'm doing for my training." Just wanted to keep you up to date. And you can get solicitation, you can get donations doing it that way. You don't be afraid of business associates, my doctors, my lawyers, my financial planner, all of those people that are part of my life that I, don't see on a daily basis, but, are part of what I do. They're all included. And like David said, I'm surprised sometimes by who gives and who gives what. One year I got one of my largest donations, I think in my second year, was from a friend I hadn't seen in 20 years, and she saw it on Facebook. And my quote, what I put on Facebook was, "I am $800 from my goal. Please help me get there. Every dollar counts." And she gave me all 800. And I had done this, I think it was my second ride. So you never know where the money's going to come from. So don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid, to put stuff out there like I have this much to go, or, halfway there. All the tips that David's giving you are great tips. I've been relatively successful in doing this. I think after my third year, I really started to, listen to whatever other people were doing and take other ideas and use them. And, David's gone through pretty much all of them, but yeah, just don't be afraid to ask and don't be afraid to thank. Those are the things that,
Also, David Duff just posted a
Yes.
way to change your URL into a QR code. For those
Yeah,
of you who are
I actually got some small
savvy
donations.
enough to know what to do with that.
Right. I got some small donations from Instagram through my kids. And that was because we just posted the QR code. So that's the thing, that's the menu that you now get at restaurants when
The
they're
toast menu.
placed to print stuff. You just look in your phone and then it opens up your website. So that's another way to get there quickly. I've seen people print that out on t-shirts. So again, it's all a way to make it fun and to get people to interact. So I was thinking about printing that out on pieces of paper. If I've got the gumption, I might put it on a t-shirt and wear it once in a while when I go riding.
Another thing, if you're funding part of your ride, if you are contributing to your own ride in some ways, it's great to offer people a match. Hey, join me in supporting the Arava Institute. Join me in doing this, or I'm matching the first $1,800 or the first $1,000 or the first whatever of my, help me get there. That also will encourage people to know that you have skin in the game, and also that they're joining you in supporting this endeavor.
Yeah, I should have made that
yeah,
point
I was
more
gonna,
strongly, but people should know that, if you're contributing, they should know that you're contributing. If you can change that to a match, they should know that. Basically, all the things that you're doing to make this possible, that's part of your investment in this. And when you're asking others to come part way, they should know what you're doing.
yeah, I agree 100%. I always, in my first letter, I always put out, I've made a donation and hope you can join me. I always make the first donation.
Going to
something that this is my first Israel ride, but several years ago I did another ride that was required raising more than $4,000, which and I don't work for I mean, I'm retired now, but even when I did work, I was self-employed, so I didn't have any matching funds opportunities or things of that nature. But what I did, which I think David has at least alluded to, is I tried to build excitement in my community. I would have a monthly sort of progress report. And even if the fundraising wasn't all that much to write home about, I would talk about my training, which is always ahead of my fundraising. And people are astonished when they see, wait, he's ridden 2,000 miles already to get ready for this. You know, he's done centuries already to get ready for this. You know, so that is even if you haven't contributed, that's a way that earns their admiration and desire to support.
Yeah, I can't reinforce that enough. It's like I said at the beginning, especially for people who are pretty experienced cyclists, they might not necessarily see this as a big deal. But to your friends who aren't, it's a big deal that you're traveling to another country to ride 250 plus miles on a bike to support this cause. So the whole process of how you're getting there and inviting them into that story, I think can be hugely important and in a good, inclusive way. And share the story in your community. Hector, if I remember correctly, I was told you're sharing the story some with other people in your church, talking about the trip to Israel and the importance too of making that trip and supporting this work. I think it's great that you're doing that. I look forward to meeting you on the ride. But I'd cite that as another example of, you know, even if I've been hugely fortunate to be able to do this for so many years, but it actually doesn't make it any less of a big deal to do it in each individual year and share your excitement, bring people into the story.
Thank you, everyone. Oh, Bill, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. Could you just talk a little bit about maybe strategy or experience in the difference of asking for a specific amount versus explaining how much you're trying to raise?
It's a really good question. If I'm hearing you correctly, it's the difference between saying, you know, dear David, I'd love for you to contribute $100 versus not putting a specific amount out there. Some people have a fear if I put out a specific amount, I might actually be sort of underselling it versus over. I know riders who do both and have had similar success. So I think a little bit of it comes back to knowing your community. I see a lot of riders who they put out something that basically says, you know, I'm aiming to raise $5,000 from 50 friends, and they hope their friends can do the math, and that implies $100 each. I tend in my letters to focus on where I am and where I'm going, but actually I usually don't put out specific amounts. And I think there is always the thing, and this maybe is a little parallel to Sharon's experience with that old friend. I know that what some schools do in their fundraising, they intentionally go with a high ask, and especially for younger people, they know that it's aspirational, but it's done politely so that someone doesn't feel like they're not doing enough if they don't meet the ask. But it's also done to put out the sort of implied message that that bigger amount's not unreasonable. And, you know, maybe not this year, but maybe when they support your ride next year. So I think about a little bit about what you think works for you and your friends, but I think the most important thing is once you settle into it, ask. I know that almost seems trite, but it's some school used to give out something and basically it was the key to fundraising. Ask early, ask often.
There was a mention about doing a personal match, telling your donors that you'll match what they do. The other side is remember that many of your donors may be working for organizations that will match the donation. And Arvana Institute is on one of the major systems that corporations are using to attract donations from their employees. So the good news is it's listed. It is an organization that qualifies for matches. And it's, you know, it's important to at least mention it, because some people say, yeah, I think I have that, and not even think about it. That's a nice way to at least double your donations if their organization doesn't.
It's a great suggestion, Bruce. Thank you for reminding us of it. I have a couple of regular donors who always about a month after their donation, a second donation shows up from their company, and it's because they're proactive about doing it. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
think we're at the top of the hour. Let me give it back to you, Alana.
Yeah, I thank you to both of our speakers tonight for sharing your wisdom, and for everyone who joined us. We're really, really excited to have you on the ride this year, and I'm available to help you personalize your fundraising page, or help you send out emails. There's kind of like a system where you could personalize the first name of an email, so I'm happy to help. And I'll send up a follow-up email with more resources and tools, so look out for that. Bless you, David.
I got it on mute before I sneezed.
That's good. Okay, thank you so much.
If anyone was worried, it's not COVID. I took a test. It's just a cold. I'm not contagious.
Everyone.
I'll say good night. Whoever wants to hop off can hop off. And Hector, I see you have your hand up, so we'll stay on, and yeah, feel free to ask your question.
Good night, all.
Everyone.
Good night.
Hi,
Hi, Hector.
does Miriam left? Miriam?
Miriam had to leave at the top of
Oh,
the
okay,
hour,
because
but Alana or I might be able to help you. And if we can't, then we'll get the answer from Miriam.
I just wanted to let her know that I just emailed her and I copy you, Alana,
Okay.
because I believe that the information that she shared on what the Arava Institute is doing for the environment is awesome. And I would like to include that into as much information on that regard as I can into my fundraising campaign going forward. And
Okay.
thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll be sending an email with like a lot more information. So even like I don't know if I sent this to you, but like a pre-written text that that you can use that has a lot of information about the Arava Institute. So you didn't need to take notes tonight. We'll give you the information, and then you'll have it to pass on to your supporters. So
Thank you, much appreciated.
yeah, sure. We're happy to help, and hopefully you'll be on the ride with us. So
I hope so.
yeah.
I
Okay.
hope so too.
Thank you for joining
It's good to
tonight.
see you, Hector. And to
Yeah.
see you, Alana.
Yeah, you too. And
It was a pleasure.
we'll all be in touch.
Okay. Take care.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.